Now, for this session, we all know that AI is changing the legal industry at an unprecedented pace, and immigration law is no exception. From automating repetitive tasks to optimizing workflows and even enhancing client communication, AI has the power to transform how immigration law firms operate. But with all of this innovation comes a big question. How do you integrate AI in a way that can actually benefit your practice without sacrificing compliance, security, or the personal touch that clients value? That's exactly what we're here to explore today. And joining us are two experts who have been at the forefront of legal tech and AI in immigration practice. First, we have with us Andrew Thrasher, the founder of Titus Consulting. Andrew is passionate about helping immigration law firms build smarter, more efficient services that meet the demands of modern clients. With a background in employment-based immigration and legal tech startups, he brings a unique perspective on optimizing law firm operations. He regularly shares insights on legal operations, technology, and change management on LinkedIn and his website. We also have with us Josh Schachnow, an immigration attorney and CEO of Visto.ai, an AI-powered platform designed to help immigration law firms streamline their operations. Based in Toronto, Josh has helped hundreds of individuals and businesses navigate the complexities of Canadian immigration. Beyond his legal practice, he's deeply involved in the intersection of law and technology. He shares his expertise with over 18,000 LinkedIn followers and writes a very popular Substack newsletter covering law, business, AI, and personal growth. This is certainly going to be a highly practical and very insightful discussion. So let's dive in. Guys, the floor is all yours. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Josh. Really appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. Very excited to jump in here. Andrew, I'm sorry, your name got cut off on the bottom left here because our pictures are in the way, but I did have your name here. Just let the record show. Anyways, I'm going to jump right in because this is hopefully going to be an extremely helpful and mostly actionable session where we're going to talk about AI. We're also going to share our screens. We're going to dive into tools that we're using and all that kind of stuff. So I'll do a really quick introduction, going to talk about what is AI. Maybe some of you have used it, maybe you haven't, maybe you don't even know what it is. I'll do a quick kind of pros and cons comparison. And then I'm going to get into the fun stuff, which on my end is going to be talking about how to use AI for things like administrative tasks and marketing for your law firm. And then I'm also going to continue to share my screen and show you some of the tools that I use. I'll hand it over to Andrew. He's going to talk about cybersecurity and other, related risks to be aware of. He's going to talk about operational tasks and tools that he can suggest. And then we're going to leave some time for a Q&A as well. If you do have Q&A, make sure to use that Q&A chat, I've been told, and we'll work off of that for the Q&A session. Because Josh gave such a good, thorough introduction, I'm just going to skip over this boring stuff. He covered all the important stuff. I'm just north of Toronto, Canadian lawyer, got bored of doing immigration after 3 or 4 years and co-founded Visto, which basically uses automation and AI to help Canadian immigration firms practice more efficiently. So I've spent most of the last 5 years more so on the tech side than on the legal side, which has been a lot of fun. I did want to start this presentation with a quick question, just to get a sense. How many of you have even used AI at all? And the reason why I asked this is to give Andrew and I just an idea. Are we working with a crowd that has a ton of experience, a little bit of experience? Are we still kind of hesitant? We're a little afraid by what's out there. I'd love to see in the chat, have you used AI a lot, a little, not at all? I'll just give it like a quick 30 seconds. Andrea says we do. Claudia says I've used ChatGPT. Have you used AI? Oh, that's Josh. We use it daily. We do. Okay, so this seems like, because I've done a few webinars with different crowds of lawyers, and a lot of, mixed bag in terms of some are a little bit more earlier on or not using it as much, but clearly we have a pretty good crew in attendance here today. So little, not at all, we do. Okay, so I'll go over kind of the basics really quickly, right? What is AI to begin with? This is straight off of Wikipedia because there are so many different definitions. But what I like to do really quick is talk about the Wikipedia definition. I'm based in Canada, so I'm a little biased towards some of the Canadian references. So for you Americans, IRCC is Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. So like the Canadian version of USCIS. And basically, you can see here, and I think maybe we'll share the deck after, but refers to the capability of computational systems to perform tasks typically associated with human intelligence, such as learning, reasoning, problem solving, perception, and decision making. From IRCC, information technology that performs tasks that would ordinarily require biological brain power to accomplish, such as making sense of spoken language, learning behaviors, or solving problems. So the big difference here that I want to highlight is, you can see the last point at the bottom, the difference between AI and automation. So for example, if you were coding a piece of software as automation, you might write a line of code that says something like, if this, then that, right? If I type A on my keyboard, make sure the letter A shows up in my word processor, right? Kind of hard, fast rules, if this, then that. The big difference with AI and what we're seeing in this description here is the capability of these systems, software, technology to decision make and reason on its own, right? So for example, the tools we're about to show you are trained on maybe a vast or a small amount of data, and we ask it a question, and the technology is actually analyzing and making decisions. Now, there's some really good things that can come from that, and there's really dangerous things that can come from that, right? So just a few things to keep in mind here. Some pros and opportunities of using AI. Obviously, time saving. We're going to show you how, right? Ways that you can use AI as a form of technology to do things much faster than you would normally have to do it on your own. Fewer human hours required. Maybe you're keeping an eye on your overhead. Maybe you're a sole practitioner and you're starting to get busy and you actually don't want to hire people, right? Or you don't want to hire more people. AI is a way to use a tool to get more done with less, so that you don't have to spend as much money on humans, on training, on, whatever it might be. Or maybe you're just happy with the size of your firm, and although you do want to, grow. Saving money is huge, right? Kind of relates to all of that, right? The grand theme here is getting more done with less with some of these tools that we're about to show you. Now, with like anything, there are absolutely risks, right? And negatives associated with using it, especially if not using it correctly. Number one, there's definitely a learning curve, right? I argue it's not too big of a learning curve, especially if you start with some of the basics that we're going to show you, but there's definitely a learning curve, especially if you're, necessarily not so tech savvy, and because you might be noticing how quickly this technology is evolving. So you got to learn the basics, but then kind of keep up with how things are evolving. Privacy and security, we're going to touch on that a little bit too. But for example, AI can be great at drafting documents or responding to emails. For example, do you want to be sharing that information with some of these big tech companies? Do you want them to have access to your documents and your clients' personal information and stuff like that, right? Hugely important. Along the same lines, confidentiality, right? Privacy, security, maybe with some of your IP and documents and stuff like that. Confidentiality with, do you want these companies having access to what you and your client are typing back and forth via email? Specific documents that you're drafting that mention their personal information and stuff like that. That can kind of vary widely based on the type of law you're practicing, what country you're in, what state or province you're in, right? What your law society says in terms of rules and regulations. Lastly, reputation. We might touch on this a little bit, but AI can hallucinate, right? So we've seen cases of this in the US, literal court cases in the US and in Canada, about what can happen if you use AI, don't review it, and rely on it to be accurate when it is not, and what that can mean for you and your reputation as a lawyer, as a firm, everything like that. So, right, like everything, there's pros and cons, keep them in mind, and you'll have to make the decision for yourself based on how much you want to use it. Now, in my opinion, the best way to use AI for right now is as a tool. It is not a full-on replacement of people or of you. It is a tool that you and your firm and your team can use to help you get from step 0 to 80% of the way there, sometimes almost instantly, instead of starting from a blank canvas, so to speak. So, opportunity number one, I'm going to talk about two key opportunities. Admin tasks for the firm and marketing for the firm. And then Andrew will talk about operational. Now, things to think about more so from the admin side, think about things like responding to clients and emails. AI, this second bullet I think is huge, is really good at condensing, summarizing, simplifying, reframing, right? And we're gonna show you some ways to do that in just a second, right? Maybe you get a huge blurb of text. Maybe you need to summarize a case. Maybe you've been sent 70 different documents, right? When you're creating new stuff, it can be very risky for hallucinating, but when you're using it to summarize and simplify stuff you already have, it is very, very powerful, obviously keeping confidentiality in mind. What are some other admin tasks you might have to do as a law firm? Creating job descriptions, maybe creating new principles that you want to run your firm by, systems, processes, website pages, right? All that content and stuff like that. And lastly, customer service. I'm going to show you a tool that can help with that as well. A really quick list of tools, some of which I'm going to show you in just a second. Obviously, the OG, some might say, is ChatGPT, right? In terms of having a conversation with AI, there are plenty of other options as well. So, for example, Microsoft has their Copilot, although that's built on OpenAI's LLM. Google has its own Gemini. Claude, I really like for writing. I'll talk about in just a few minutes. Building custom databases or in-house databases with something like Google's Notebook LM, I'm going to show you in just a second. Writing assistants, there's plenty. Drafting, SEO, chatbots, and stuff like that. Again, this is just a list. There's plenty of tools. And I'm going to show you how Dante AI works for something like what happens when someone lands on your website, and maybe you want a scalable way to handle customer support or leads and stuff like that. So I'll show you a couple really quick here. Number one, ChatGPT. The interesting thing lately about ChatGPT, now you don't even have to log in at all, right? So you can choose, hey, I don't want to log in. There are obvious benefits to logging in, right? It can save your history and you can give it more specific instructions, but you don't have to. So let's say you wake up tomorrow, you haven't been leveraging AI and your firm's getting so big that you have to hire, right? Maybe you've never hired before. And I need a job description, right? I am a lawyer based in Florida. Now, one tip I'm going to give you really quick. The quality of the input affects the quality of the output. If you're super vague and short with your instructions, don't expect a great response. The more specific you are with your instructions, the better the results, right? So for example, here's an example. I'm a lawyer based in Florida. I run an immigration firm focused on business immigration, and I want to hire a new law clerk. My office is in Miami, and I require in-office from staff 4 days a week. My clerk will be helping me directly with business immigration files. Please prepare a job description with a salary range of 50 to 60K. I'm just, you get my point at this point, right? So I'm just going to click the button here. And what you're going to see is within a few seconds, you're going to get a drafted job description. That's probably at least 80 to 90% of the way there in terms of what you need and depending on how picky you are, right? Now, again, the key here is I gave it a pretty decent amount of instructions to start with. And now what I can do is read it. I can either, for example, copy it, maybe move it over to a Word document and make some little adjustments, or maybe there's some big things that I don't like. And so I can just continue the conversation, right? This is good, but, please make sure to mention that there is lots of opportunity for upward career movement too. Right? Now, again, you can just go add that sentence yourself, or you can continue to fine tune and add more details back and forth with the AI, right? So I'm going to leave that at there because I want to get through a bunch of other tools and I only have about 6 minutes left. Notebook LM, this is from Google. I think if you're a G Suite user, it's free. And I find this really powerful for things like creating your own databases and querying stuff off that. So I'll give you an example. I've gotten very frustrated and bored with immigration law in Canada. On a more personal note, we won't go down that rabbit hole. And I've been dipping into some family law in Ontario. I'm new to family law. I don't know that much about it yet. And so I find myself having to do all this research. Now, obviously, I can go online and do all the research. Or what I could do in Notebook LM is create a chatbot of my own with my own sources. I can upload Google Docs. I can add links to websites, YouTube videos. I can even just copy and paste text or upload files. So you can see here on the left, I have like 20 plus files of the family law rules, all the associated acts, calculations I might need. And I've pretty much built my own little mini database. And now I can just start asking, how do I file an application for divorce, right? Just super simple question just to kind of show you how it works. And what it's going to do is it's going to leverage AI to filter through all of this content and provide me with an answer, right? So number one, here's my answer. And number two, almost every sentence, you're actually seeing the source of where it's pulling it from. And the reason why this is important, especially in law, is I want to go double check, right? Yes, I want to use AI maybe to give you the basics. And now I know, hey, this answer can be found in these documents at this section, right? So super important there. Lastly, really quick, Dante, again, there's a million of these now where you can basically build your own chatbot. Similar functionality here where I can create my own knowledge base. So for example, I have my law firm website. Please don't judge me on the design. It's not my strong suit. But what I can do is basically take my law firm URL, throw it into Dante, and now it's basically adding all of my different pages as content. I can stick it on my website. And now if somebody comes to my website and they have a question, they might say like, what is Josh's background, right? Whatever, super vague question, but you get my point here. And the AI will respond based on the information that it has from my website, right? Obviously, you can make this more complex and stuff like that, but just showing you how that works. And then what you can do with a few clicks is add it to your website. Here's the script, copy. I can add it to my website as an iframe, as a bubble, as a direct link, et cetera, et cetera. So super powerful, all right out of the box. I'm going to move really quick because I only have 2 minutes, but I have a lot of other cool stuff to show you really quickly. I think the most underrated and underutilized use of AI for law firms right now is marketing. And the reason for that is AI is still relatively new. And as we've said, there's some risks for things like hallucinating and making sure to double check everything when it comes to legal work. We have a lot of liability. Where do we have less liability? Marketing, right? Creating things like blog posts and social media posts and videos and all that kind of stuff. And AI is so good at creating, repurposing, and I'll show you a few ways to do that right now, especially if you're trying to boost your presence online, get more clients, drive more traffic, build an email list. There are so many great tools for doing stuff like this. Here are a few, and again, hopefully they can send you guys the deck afterwards. And again, I'm not saying you have to use these. I'm saying here's some examples of what you can use, but there's obviously other options out there. So for example, what I think is a great move right now is generating long form video content and then repurposing it. So for example, this is a tool called Descript. I host a podcast called the Canadian Immigration Pros Podcast. Highly recommend subscribing, by the way. I can record this podcast. So this is the last episode I recorded with Clinton and throw it into Descript. Descript will transcribe the whole thing and let me edit it using AI super quickly. I can click a button to boost the sound quality. I can use AI to find and remove filler words like and that kind of stuff. I can shorten word gaps. So I could say, hey, if there's a gap of more than 3 seconds, cut it down to 1 second. And this takes me 2 clicks to do. It's crazy. And then obviously I can push it to YouTube. I can download the audio, et cetera, et cetera. Then what I do is I take that clip from YouTube, right? Maybe it's in this case, a 39-minute video, and I post it on YouTube, and I post the audio on a podcast. And then I take the link and I throw it into this tool called Opus Pro. What Opus does is it takes your long form video, it uses AI to chop it up into short mini clips, right? So now it's going to find what it thinks are the most interesting parts. I can preview them all right here. I'm not going to show you the whole thing. I can go in, I can edit that specific clip, I can add my own branding, et cetera, and then I can post it to all of these platforms with auto-generated descriptions and hashtags. I can just click this button, and it's been posted to 4 different platforms that I can manage as well. So I'm going to cut it off there because, because my time is up. But as you can tell,
please continue, Josh. Don't worry about the time.
This is kind of where, as you can see, I'm on my last tab. So this is actually where I plan to call it quits, shall we say. But a huge opportunity, especially if you want to grow your firm and you're finding it hard to get your personal brand or your firm brand out there. There's so many of these tools now that will help you create, repurpose, post, generate, all this kind of stuff. Go use it, especially if you're hesitant to use it for legal work. Use it for marketing and content creation. As was mentioned earlier, happy to connect on YouTube. Visto is our website there, and I post a few times a week talking about law, tech, AI on my Substack. So definitely check that out. And that's it for me. Andrew, over to you.
Awesome. No, thanks, Josh. That was great. And I will kind of, as taking it from there, I'll kind of cover some of the same tools that Josh already previewed and kind of show some different ways to use it, especially on both cybersecurity and operations. So what that means on cybersecurity, I think we are obviously all aware that this is a very easy to access type of tool. You know, unlike any other new technology that we've basically ever seen in human history, this is one of the most democratized access tools that we can possibly imagine. And so the best way to get used to using a tool like ChatGPT or Claude is just to use it. As Josh mentioned, the only way you're really going to appreciate and understand where these tools can really apply and kind of 10x your work is by using it throughout your operations. Now, with immigration law, that's difficult. Obviously, the data we're using in our day-to-day work is privileged, it's sensitive. There are so many concerns with any technology that we're using in our work. Obviously, when it's a tool that is so easy to access, that is amplified in some ways. The main thing that we, both Josh and I would really encourage, and what Josh already mentioned, is finding ways to use it and practice and test it out that don't require sensitive data. So marketing and operations, those are really good areas to kind of test this out without having to, worry about the encryption status, stature of the tools that you're testing out. Now, before I start kind of previewing some of these tools, the one thing I would mention is that there are so many new tools out there that from a cybersecurity perspective, I think one of the most important things is just to make sure that you're vetting each tool before you use it. There's a lot of free tools out there. And as I learned from working in tech and working in software development with an engineering team, is free tools, you're typically the product there in terms of the data that you're providing. So you want to be careful to not provide any sensitive data that you wouldn't want, owned by someone else. So that being said, I'll share my screen and start with Notebook in what Josh has already kind of previewed with Notebook. I'll take that into a cybersecurity perspective rather than working with Notebook. And let me just pull this up 1 second. So I have Notebook pulled up here, and I have 2 different sources. This one is the right one that I meant to show. Apologies there. So this is an NIST report. If you're not familiar, it's the essentially the US agency that publishes reports on everything from technology to lab sciences. And they publish a lot of data standards, different taxonomies. This new report was just released earlier this week, and it is essentially their the government's way of detailing how to respond to adversarial attacks through machine learning, which is just a branch of AI. Now, this is a very long, very technical report. What I did to understand from a cybersecurity perspective, what I, as a business owner, consulting with law firms and understanding what these AI tools and where the risks may lie, I wanted to understand this report, but I don't necessarily have the time to review that 70, 80-page report the same day. So Notebook is a great way to get that first, deep dive without having to put in too much extra effort. One of the ways I really like, and Google just added this new mind map feature. So I've added this report. All I have to do is click mind map, and it's going to create a new mind map. I'll click on one that's already been created for this report. And it's going to help you kind of, again, visualize all of the relationships between the different ideas and different concepts within this report. So you can start breaking it down even further. And then if you click onto any of these things, it'll actually create some additional suggested questions, and it'll start chatting with that report. And again, as Josh showed, you have the citations for each of these. So it's a great way to then reference back and be able to, learn more. If you find an area that you really want to do a deep dive, you can actually add those sources. So, let's say this references another website. I can go back and add that website and then just refresh everything, and it's going to add that additional context. You can create study guides and timelines. So if you're using a report that includes a lot of dates and it's more of a historical breakdown, especially on the legal side when doing legal research, you can create these timelines and start visualizing and interacting with that data a lot easier than it would take in terms of, actually reading that entire report front to back in a way that's probably not going to be feasible when it's not something that is, the heart and core of your work. Now, moving on to a different use case for Notebook, and I will share a different tab. In this one, I've added a bunch of standard operating procedures for an immigration law firm. Very basic, and I will show you what those look like in Notion, which is another tool that I will show here in a second. But for these operating procedures, I essentially just uploaded a bunch of checklists for a variety of visa types that would be commonly used in a employment-based immigration law firm here in the US. Now, the reason why Notebook, I think, is a really cool tool for operating procedures, process documentation, is that one, you can interact with it, but two, you can actually share these out. So if you want to make this available to everyone on your team, you can create even a little welcome note. I hope that's viewable on when I share the screen, but this little share pop-up modal will allow you to share this with the rest of your team. And then this analytics tab, once you've had other people viewing this, you can actually check back and see what people are interacting with. So is a large percentage of your attorneys and paralegals interacting with your H-1B workflow? Maybe it's time to take a look and make sure that that H-1B workflow is, set up and edited correctly, updated, things like that. So it's a really good way to kind of start creating a knowledge base without too much extra work from the start. Now, again, if I do a mind map of these operating procedures, it's going to allow me to visualize and see, okay, these are the step-by-step processes of an H-1B visa according to the standard operating procedures of my firm. Then I can, as Josh showed, interact with it by typing. I can also create, and then as you may have seen, the little deep dive conversation, aka the podcast button. You can generate a little 10-minute typically blurb about whatever you've uploaded, and it'll have a podcast essentially interacting with that material and talking about it. And then you can actually edit that podcast and work with it even more and edit that down and add additional sources. So again, it's a really cool way to test this out without using any type of confidential data. And, especially in areas where you need to learn quickly, or you need to kind of share your learning or your procedures with a larger group of individuals. Now, going to a kind of a similar use case within Claude, which I know Josh has already mentioned, and let me pull up Claude, is that Claude also is really good at programming. And now, while most of us in law are not going to be the type that are looking to code and kind of create, a new app from scratch, there is some potential to use these very basic coding features within a tool like Claude to kind of create some simple diagrams, for instance. So I'll show you using Claude what that looks like. Let me pull that up. All right, so as you can see here, I've just typed out, and apologies, this is already kind of, I'll save you the time and I've already done this. So I've just asked it to review an OAT1 workflow checklist that I prepared, very basic checklist, and you can see that right here. So it just breaks down by stage and each role and what they're handling on each stage of that O1 workflow. I then asked it to create a flowchart with swim lanes so that I can help visualize that process from start to finish and share that with the rest of the team so that everyone understands their role. And then also, I wanted to kind of create a customer journey map. So now that I have typed that in, all it took was about 1.5 minutes of waiting, and it coded this and created a pretty simple, but also very effective visual diagram of this process that you can then add to whatever knowledge base you're using. So again, if you're using Notebook, I can actually take these images, feed them back to Notebook as part of that knowledge base. And then when individuals interact with that knowledge base, they're actually able to cite these process documentation and these visuals as well as that text. So it's a really cool way to kind of make your process documentation, your standard operating procedures, very visual, but also very accessible for your team. And so that when you're training a new individual, for instance, you don't just hand them a 40-page PDF, for instance, of all of your standard operating procedures. You have some visual elements. You have a way for them to interact with those basic, policies, for instance, HR policies. That Notebook LM can be a really effective tool to kind of answer those questions for your team, especially in a hybrid work environment when not everyone is in the office. So those are kind of some of the basics that I really suggest from a where can we kind of test out these products without, again, feeling like we have to be providing it sensitive data. Now, one of the last thing that I'll show, which is kind of a pet peeve of mine in working with law firms, is testing new software can be really difficult when you don't have fake data to test it out with. What they call it in software engineering, you may have heard the term dummy data. There's a few different terms for it, but essentially any software quality assurance team, when testing a product like a case management system, they want to make sure that you're testing it with data that will help you find any potential errors or any issues that might come up. And that's the same when testing a product as a law firm owner. You want to understand how a product works, but you obviously don't want to be using your client's sensitive data when testing out a product in a sandbox environment. So another way to use a tool like Claude or ChatGPT is to kind of just use it to create some fake data. So I've used it, and you just can feed it, for instance, a blank table, Excel sheet, for instance, with all of the rows and columns that you need to populate into a case management system, and ask it to use literary characters from, the books from the 1800s, and it'll populate that data so that you can then freely use it to test out the products that you want to test out in your practice without feeling like you're compromising your client data. So it's a really good way to kind of create some fake data and use it accordingly across all of the technology that you want to test out in a way that just makes it much easier. So that's kind of my last little tip there, but that is really the heart of kind of testing out the operational procedures. Now, going back to the cybersecurity aspect, the biggest tip that I would have, and I don't have any slides here necessarily, it's more of just kind of verbal tips, is one, making sure that you vet each product. Two, you make sure that everyone on your team understands the expectations of these products. So if you are introducing a tool into your operations and it's going to be accessible, especially like Microsoft Copilot, when you can't obviously restrict that tool to certain individuals if you're using it across your practice, you're going to want to make sure that you actually consult with how those tools are set up, whether or not they're using your training, using your data to train new products. Most of the big market tools, Microsoft, Google, ChatGPT, are using pretty standard terms, but you do want to make sure that you understand how your data is going to be used by each tool. So it's definitely not an area to kind of cut costs by saving a few dollars and opting for a cheaper product. You'll want to make sure that you're focusing on, you know, products that have documented and provided proof that they are not using your data to train their products, which is obviously not something that you would want to do with any confidential client data. Now, I know that's I jumped through that a little quick, so I think we're a little early on the Q&A. Josh, did you have anything else to add in terms of what I went over with Notebook?
No, I mean, super interesting, especially for me trying to stay up on the cyber stuff that mostly is over my head. But it might even be good to start the Q&A early because it looks like we have a decent amount. So I'm totally fine with that. Or based on the Q&A, we can do more sharing screen of tools, or, you know, whatever we think is most interesting.
I can jump into the Q&A, guys, and probably there we might be able to do a little screen sharing as well with some of the questions, I think, if that works for you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So the first question comes from Carrie. She's asking, ChatGPT has a feature where you can keep your data private and not used to train the program. Is this safe for confidential information, in your opinion?
Josh, I'll jump. I have a few things to say, but I'll let you handle
Yeah,
that.
I'm going to keep my answer very short because Andrew will have the most helpful information. I mean, the big question for me is like, do you trust the company, right? Because you can log in, you can pay for the upgraded version, and you can click the button, hey, don't train on your information, but your information is still there, right? So do you trust what OpenAI is putting in their terms of use and, you know, privacy policies? Do you trust Microsoft? Do you trust Google? I don't know, right? That's for each of you to decide. My biggest piece of advice is to anonymize any information that you put in anyways. So if you're going to draft a document, take out Bill's last name, or take out Sally's address and put 123 Fake Street, right? Like maybe you have these standard anonymization techniques that you can use every time you're using AI, and then you can copy and paste the results, put it back into your Word or your Google Doc, and then put that personal information back in. I think that's the most careful way to do it, but I'm going to default to Andrew here because he probably knows the technical side a lot better.
No, I think that's a great explanation. I think that's how I would recommend approaching it as well. Is that really so many of these products are pushing out new features basically on a weekly basis to the point where their terms of service, for instance, and terms of use are changing rapidly, sometimes behind the scenes without any customers realizing it. And so it's just making sure that you trust the companies that you're using, you know, the products that you're using from them. And as Josh mentioned, anonymization is going to be key with any of this. So I know some of these products that work in e-discovery, for instance, have built-in tools where they'll do that for you, where they'll kind of like remove all of the PII from a, you know, document before using it, and other features before feeding it into an analytics tool, for instance. So some of those tools already exist specifically in some of these, you know, more litigation heavy products that are dealing with, you know, large volumes of confidential, you know, corporate data, things of that nature. So I hope that we'll see more of that become common in some of these consumer tools like ChatGPT, where we can start using these tools a little bit more safely by having those additional kind of layers of anonymization and, you know, encryption. So don't send war plans in ChatGPT yet.
We're on Signal, apparently. Yeah.
Very topical, guys. Thanks for that. And as a nice segue into a couple things you mentioned number one, do you trust the company? And you also mentioned briefly, you can log in, you can pay. A couple other questions. Somebody asked, in general, is it safe to put confidential information in paid online AI tools? And somebody else asked a general question about which of these programs are free, which ones do you need to purchase? Maybe talk about some of the benefits about the free versus the purchased, and does purchasing one of these products make your information safer?
Yeah, I'll start quick and then I'll let the expert dive in. Most of these tools have a free plan, right? And that's kind of the beauty, is you can dip your toes in and try, right? So ChatGPT has a free plan, Claude has a free plan, even Descript and Opus, the other tools that I showed you, they pretty much all have free plans. As Andrew alluded to, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, which means they're taking your data and they're training their model on it, most likely. Now, upgrading to paid, again, we kind of touched on earlier. There are some benefits. You can tell them not to train based on your information, but again, it goes to that deeper question of like, do you trust them enough? So I think it's really dependent. What type of data are we talking about? How much do you trust these different companies? Which companies are you using to begin with? What are their terms of use? What are their privacy policies? But again, when in doubt, if there's a way for you to just don't include confidential information, period, that's always the best bet.
Yep. No, I agree. And I think that's, how I would sum it up is paid tools, you have a little bit more control, but it's never a guarantee that, the data that you're providing is safe. And so, I think there's a lot of free tools that it sounds like Josh and I both are using. And some of the free tools that I've used, and I'll actually share my screen for one that I love using just for basic process documentation, is Napkin. And again, it's not anything, I'm not providing any data that would be sensitive or confidential. This is just a simple H-1B visa process checklist. And Napkin will create these visual charts based on whatever you feed it. So going back to what Josh mentioned about how generative AI and large language models work, they're really good at summarizing, taking a bunch of unstructured data and restructuring it, condensing it into different formats. So Napkin is a great free tool. They have a paid plan, but I just use the free version. All you have to do is paste your processes in here and it'll suggest different visuals. So if I just copy this, for instance, and click this button, it'll suggest some different visuals for the LCA filing task of the H-1B process. So some of these are really cool free tools. And that's why I'm hesitant to say don't use free versions, because it really is more contextual to the way you're using it and what you're using it for.
Amazing, amazing. And continuing that thought, where we have logging in as a guest, logging in through your email, paying for a subscription for one of these services. One of our questions is, how can I have an AI tool write in my style? So kind of conforming it more to you as an individual rather than just giving you random information. Do one of these methods provide an advantage in that sense to training the AI tool to adapt to the user?
Yeah, I mean, they pretty much all do, I mean, especially a lot of the ones that we covered, right? So that would be a great reason to upgrade for something like ChatGPT, Claude. I really like Claude for writing. So I think another thing that we didn't really touch on per se is now there's all these AI tools and all these LLMs, and there actually are strengths and weaknesses to some of them. So for example, I find OpenAI sounds a little robotic, but it's really good at summarization, analysis, research, et cetera, et cetera. I find Claude, CLAUDE, to be really good at natural sounding writing if you're kind of writing from scratch. So for example, one thing you could do is go with the Claude paid tool. You can use a custom GPT too, right? Whatever. I'm not telling you which tool to use. I'm just giving you my suggestions. But one thing you can do is you can create, I think you need a paid plan for almost any of these to do this. And you can basically upload a small or ideally larger document with a lot of your text. So for example, I built a custom GPT and I went through a year's worth of my LinkedIn posts. For the record, I post fairly often on LinkedIn, probably anywhere from like 4 to 6 times a week. I copy pasted all of those posts for an entire year and I put it into a Google document and I converted it to a PDF and I uploaded it into a custom GPT. And I said, hey, you're now my custom LinkedIn writer. I'm going to give you a prompt and you're going to give me output using language that I have previously used, right? And that can be a super powerful way to have the benefit of AI, but also have the benefit of it not sounding too much like AI. So, I think that's a huge potential. You could use Notebook for that too, right? Andrew and I both talked about Notebook. Just upload those sources of like volumes of text of your own writing and then prompt it to, hey, draft me a LinkedIn post about the recent H-1B draw using my language. Bing, bang, boom.
Yeah, now I'll add a little bit in terms of context on Claude. I love Claude as well. I think, one thing to consider with these foundational models, these large models like Claude and ChatGPT, is that they're not necessarily built. They're available to consumers. They're not necessarily designed for consumers yet. In terms of the economics and the business model, they're building for larger kind of economic financial decisions. In the meantime, the design of these products is just going to improve drastically over the next few years, now that they are getting much more of this, this feedback from users. So one of the things that Claude is really good at is organizing different ways to chat with it for different uses. So for instance, you can organize around a project. This project that I have instructions specifically for organizing and creating standard operating procedures. In this project, I can then add additional content, just like Josh showed, with ChatGPT or Notebook. You can add project knowledge specific to this project, that when I then add, a new chat, I can go back to my different response types. So you can add preferences, how you want to edit your style, for instance. You can create a custom style here by adding and writing examples. But what I really like is that I can provide my tech stack to Claude. It knows all of the products I'm using. So Google Workspace, I'm using Webflow to manage my website. I use Notebook, you get the idea. It knows every product that I'm using, so that when I ask it for a standard operating procedure, for instance, it's going to incorporate that existing knowledge and provide me a SOP that relies on that previous understanding of my tech stack. So that's a really important way to kind of consider these products, and where you're, potentially purchasing a paid account. Does that product really fit for what you're looking for from just a usability standpoint, the design of how to interact with it? Some of these are really cool ways to get a lot more out of these products.
For somebody that might be more of a novice looking to integrate AI into their practice for the first time, are there any resources you guys might recommend to learn more about these AI tools, or would you recommend just jumping in, trying a free version and playing around with it and learning on the go?
I would suggest learning on the go, but I do have one resource, and I'll put it in the chat. I'm a member of the Responsible AI and Legal Services, or RAILS, hosted by Duke University. As a UNC Tar Heel, I hate to give Duke too much credit, but Duke University's Law and Tech Center has some really good resources. They just put out their first materials on legal AI use cases. So I'll type that into the chat right now, but Rails is a really good resource for specific to legal services AI use cases.
Yeah, and I definitely echo the jump in. I think, and we work with a lot of law firms, right? I talk to immigration firms every day. And one of the biggest, I think, causes of delay is just the hesitation and almost overthinking. You do want to be strategic in your approach. But for example, if you pick something that's low risk, like I'm going to draft a blog post for my website, as long as you're going to review the output, which, spoiler alert, you should always review the output. What is the worst case that's going to happen if you use something like ChatGPT for free, draft a post, review it, maybe make a few tweaks, and throw it on your website? Probably no one's going to read it to begin with, unless you have a very busy blog post, and it's going to take you a few of them over time and the right SEO research. But really think about what's the worst case. The best way to learn in anything is jump in. And then if and when you get stuck, heck, you can use the AI to problem solve your AI, right? So for example, you can go on OpenAI, ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or Gemini today, right after this session, and start prompting it with stuff. If it's not working well, you don't understand what to do, open up YouTube and look up a guide, or ask the AI, hey, I thought the output was going to be, what am I doing wrong? Right? The AI, this is getting meta. The AI will help you use the AI, right? And while you're thinking, and a lot of other people are using it, right? They're already implementing it into their businesses. And over time, if you fall further and further behind, like Andrew mentioned, this stuff's evolving so fast. You don't have to use it for everything right now, but if you're not comfortable with AI at all, as it continues to get better, it's only going to be harder to catch up, and you might fall further and further behind from the competition that is using it.
That's great advice, Josh. Absolutely, absolutely. So we have a few minutes left, guys. So I'm going to try to tie two questions into one that are product specific. Somebody asked about ChatGPT, if you have any further tips for creating strong prompts to make sure that the response you get is more consistent with what you're trying to get out with it. And somebody else asks, in relation to Notebook LM or Dante, what kind of data you should feed it for it to be as useful as possible.
Andrew, you want to jump or?
Yeah, I'll take a quick dive at the prompt question. So I would say, as Josh mentioned, the more detail, the better. And that's going back to what Josh literally just said about the evolution of these tools. That wouldn't necessarily be my advice a year and a half ago. When ChatGPT first came out, the prompt techniques that were effective are very different than they are today, in a way that makes it much more accessible today. Prompting, don't overthink it. These tools are actually taking your prompt and redoing it in the background before acting on it, which is part of why they've gotten so good in the past year or so. So just provide it the info that it needs. Think of it as if you're providing instructions to someone on your team is the best way to kind of approach most of these prompts. Don't feel like you're missing out on some specific tip or that you need to find a specific format. Just make sure you're providing it the detail it needs to act on.
Yeah, that's part of what I was going to say, which is especially for lawyers, treat it as if you're giving instructions to a junior, right? If you open up ChatGPT and say, write me a letter about X, it's going to be vague and it's not going to be specific and it's not going to be very good. So you shouldn't be upset by the fact that the output is crap. Think about if I was to go to a brand new lawyer or a junior or an articling student, if you're in Canada, what are all the details and specifics I would give to them to get a really good output? And that should kind of guide your prompting. On the Notebook LM question, I think it really depends on what you're using it for, right? You want to give enough data and sources contingent on what the heck you're using it for. If you just want to use something like Dante to answer questions from prospective clients, you really just need like your key web pages in terms of content. That could be in like 3-4 links. If you want to do comprehensive research and writing, you might want 15, 20, like I have 25 sources for that family law bot that I was using. So really conditional based on the situation.
Amazing. Amazing. Thanks so much, guys. Unfortunately, we are out of time for this session. We didn't get to every single question in the Q&A. We did post Andrew and Josh's information in the chat if you would like to reach out to them with any inquiries about anything that they discussed in general. And thank you so much for a super thoughtful and interesting conversation, guys. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Hopefully it was helpful. Thanks for having us.